Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Point Black. You know, we are very, very fortunate today. We're going to have a very good show, and we're going to have a very serious show. We're going to get deep dive into the issue of what I would call the sanctity of life. And while my good friend, co-host, and the person who really knows more about the sanctity of life than anybody, I think, in the room, because he has a, what's the word I would use? He has a calling from a very high source.
That's a good word.
That dictates. And I use the word dictates. That he stays in a realm that a lot of us want to be in, but he lives in and worships in on an ongoing basis. I'm talking about nobody other than the Reverend Daryl Gray. How you doing, Daryl, this morning?
Well, you know
this
what?
Afternoon, this evening,
yeah.
how we want to call it.
Yeah, you know, Adolphus, I'll be honest, I'm not doing good. It's not been a good last few days for me. And I want to say to all of our listeners, I appreciate you and your support. And wanting to make sure that our listeners are thoroughly informed and thoroughly educated, and through all of that they might be motivated to do a little bit more. As you said, I'm Reverend Daryl Gray. I am the Social Justice Director General for the Progressive National Baptist Convention. And this week I had a very distinct honor, Adolphus. You know, I've done a lot of different things in my life. I've been around the world. I've been to the White House several times under different presidents, Democrat and Republican, 40 years in the ministry. But this week was probably the most impactful week of my ministry. The state of Missouri executed a young man, Kevin Johnson, who committed a crime at 19 years old. He shot and killed a police officer. And almost 20 years later, the state put him to death. And I had the distinct honor and privilege and pleasure of being his spiritual advisor and sat with him at the Bonne Terre prison as he took his last breath. And so I want to dedicate if you don't mind, this show to Kevin Johnson and to his life and to his memory and to his legacy.
And Daryl, before you introduce the guest, that we have someone on the phone and we have someone here in person who really is going to be a big part of this conversation. But we just want to let the audience know that while we talk about this week, we're talking in the presence, but you may be hearing this sometime in the future.
Good.
So this week has some limit. When you hear that, that has some limitation on it, just so that as people hear it in the future, they don't think that is something that's happening or just recent happened. Because, folks, let's be clear. This is a show we hope is played over and over again because we want to make sure that everybody gets the point. So, Daryl, why don't you go ahead and introduce, and he's got two beautiful lady on the phone, Lord, and a beautiful lady in the room.
Yes, Lord.
And so, I asked you,
when we do it Point Black, we surround ourselves with beautiful people.
I'm sorry, Reverend. Audience, we got three people in the room because we got one folks that in the room that is not going to participate in the discussion, but we have a third beautiful woman in the room, and it's the wife of Reverend Daryl Gray, who's sitting there and visiting with us. So I just want to make sure you let her know we are surrounded by beauty today, amidst all of this gloom that we had to talk about. Yeah. So, Daryl, why don't you go ahead and take over for a moment?
Well, thank you very much. And I want to do this. I want to also acknowledge in the room BJ, station manager, sound person, entertainer extraordinaire, producer. He makes sure that we get to you wherever you are, in your cars, at home, on your job. And so we want to thank BJ for the work that he does. And Craig Curry, when we do our YouTube posting and our photos and everything, it is Craig Curry that, I'm telling you, I don't know if it's Photoshop or what, but Craig makes us look good. and I really appreciate it. The two people that we have who I'm going to call our resident experts, and Adolphus is right. I mentioned Kevin Johnson, but there are executions going on, scheduled to go on all over the country. There was just a botch one. What was that? Mississippi, Alabama botched execution, where they tried to kill the guy and couldn't kill him, and now they had to make a deal with the guy not to kill him the same way they were trying to kill him. And so I'm telling you, this is weird, but Joia Thornton is an avid civil rights activist and advocate. She's a writer. She's a historian. She's a policy leader. And we talked about it, her unique hometown growing up experience in Memphis, Tennessee, and New Orleans has really kind of helped her to understand all the nuances and everything that we don't understand about the death penalty and how it impacts all of us. And Joia is going to talk about it from a national perspective. She's the national policy strategist for the Southern Center for Human Rights, located in Atlanta, Georgia. And then my best friend, my bestie, my ride or die outside of my wife now, Michelle Smith, M.L. Smith. She is the co-director of Missourians for the Alternative to the Death Penalty. And she and Elise Max, her counterpart, have been leading the charge in Missouri as it relates to the abolition of the death penalty. And so we have two fantastic individuals, fantastic sisters, who are going to kind of help us to understand this I call it a death penalty crisis, but help us understand what they're doing locally, Adolphus, what they're doing around the country, and how we can get involved. Let's, if you don't mind, can we start with? I mentioned Kevin, so can we start with Michelle? Just tell us a little bit about how you got into this crusade, this mission, as far as abolition of the death penalty, and then we can get into the policy stuff. Pruitt likes the policy stuff, BJ. He likes the policy stuff, so I'm gonna let him get into the policy stuff. But just tell us how you got into it and what brought you to being a leader of this crusade.
Well, first, I definitely want to thank you, Reverend Gray, and Mr. Pruitt for allowing me to have this opportunity to speak to the audience. So the reason or the way that I got into this work is because I grew up as a poor Black person in the city of St. Louis. And so having those experiences, those struggles, those traumas, and all of that suffering molded, the way that I would interact in life later, including incarceration personally. So I have been incarcerated, and at that time, I began to do advocacy work in prison, helping other people around me to, deal with their situations. So I became very involved in the policy aspects and what our statutes in our state, how they harm people. So later on, someone, after several years of advocating in different aspects of, prison conditions, healthcare, education, I received a call. Someone said, "Oh, this organization is looking for somebody." And I honestly thought they wouldn't want me because, again, I've been to prison. I'm not necessarily educated in, I don't have a criminal justice degree, et cetera. So I didn't think that I would be a good fit, but it turned out I was. And I had an interview actually with, you all know, Mr. Nimrod Chappell, who has become an amazing mentor in my life. And it went from there. So I've known about death penalty issues in our state, including, of course, we all know Reggie Clemens' case and some other cases around the state. So the work definitely intrigued me. And I started 2 years ago. And since then, I've made it my business to not only, support those on death row and their families, but to lobby, to advocate, and to do what I can to abolish this atrocious practice in our state legislature.
So, Michelle, let me ask you to do one more thing. Who are you? Family person, large family? Can we get just a little bit more background on who you are as a person?
Actually, no, I had a pretty small immediate family, my parents and my brother and I. And interestingly enough, when I grew up, most people knew my brother. My brother worked for the city of St. Louis for 26 years.
Got it.
He was a recreation leader, which means he coached the juniors football, the kids football, and he was very involved in this city. Everybody I know Big Mike, Coach Mike. I haven't really run across too many people in this community in St. Louis that didn't know my brother. But me, I was in the house. I was studying and reading in the house. So most people have no recollection of me, but they definitely knew my brother. But I grew up in the projects of St. Louis, the 1600s, 1604 South 14th Street, apartment 813 was my address for many, many years as a youth. So I grew up in the projects. I learned how to survive, how through struggle, through strife. Definitely childhood in the 80s in the projects was not an easy thing, to be involved in. And our parents, my mom did all she could, to support us and to make sure we were educated. But, living, in St. Louis, and people always say, St. Louis, but they're not from St. Louis. They're from Chesterfield or wherever. You got to be from the city. You got to be from St. Louis to claim that and to understand everything that we went through in this community.
And the reason I asked that, because, ladies and gentlemen, I just want you to make sure that you understand that Michelle is an advocate out here, but she could be your neighbor. At one point in time, she was your neighbor. And that anybody who decides, no matter what walk of life, you decide you want to get involved, you have the ability to step up and do it. So that's why I wanted to connect with you, Michelle, because Michelle is your neighbor, my neighbor, anybody else's neighbor. And she stepped up and wanted to deal with it and did. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a quick break, and we will be right back with more Point Black. And then, Reverend, you're going to get us in front of our guest that's on the line.
Yes, I'm going to make sure. She's gonna talk about Southern pride, white mob mentality, and the death penalty. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Point Black. I'm Reverend Daryl Gray, your co-host, along with the man, the myth, the legend, the president of the St. Louis branch of the NAACP, Adolphus Pruitt. And we were having a good conversation with Michelle Smith, the co-director of Missourians for the Alternative to the Death Penalty, and one of the leading champions for the abolition of the death penalty in Missouri. And we have on the line one of the foremost national policy strategists when it comes to all things death penalty. We want to welcome to the show, welcome to Point Black, Joia Thornton, all the way from the lovely Peach State of Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome to Point Black, sis.
Thank you so much, Reverend Gray. If I ever need to be introduced at Madison Square Garden, I know who to call. President Pruitt, thank you so much for having me on the call. It feels good to be in this space. I am the daughter of a pastor and also a teacher, and I was raised in the National Baptist Convention USA Incorporated, and that's how I came to know the city of St. Louis, Missouri, traveling in the summer to the Congress and saying my little speeches at the Children's Rally and the Youth Rally. So I fell in love with St. Louis as a child, and I was compelled to come back when I heard that there were issues on the ground that we needed to tend to.
Oh, we really appreciate it. And with the work that you and Michelle do jointly and the upcoming work, we want to talk about, I know Adolphus asked Michelle, how do you get involved? I mean, this isn't glamorous work. It's hard. You've got to put yourself in it. I was reading some of your work, a commentary, Southern Pride, White Mob Mentality, and the Death Penalty. And one of the things that you say in there, the same brand of Southern pride that inspired lynching after the U.S. Civil War fuels support for the death penalty today. That's some heavy stuff. You talk to us about how you got involved and some of this. How do you draw that conclusion?
Sure. Well, for me, in your introduction of me, you talked about how I am a historian and a writer, and I give all credit to me entering into this field to who I call Mother Ida B. Wells.
I got you.
Ida B. Wells began her anti-lynching campaign and work in Memphis, Tennessee, after her three friends who were Black grocers were lynched in Memphis by a white mob. She was actually in Philadelphia at the time when the article came out, and she wrote about lynching in the South, which was, a lot of people don't know, it was almost kind of like a secret. People didn't talk about it. It wasn't until Mamie Till wanted to have an open casket that people all over the world knew of the horrors that were going on in the South. So with me listening and learning and being a student of Ida B. Wells' work, I was also introduced to Brian Stevenson's work, who made the correlation between racial terror violence of lynching and also the modern day American death penalty. So when you think about the white mobs that would often gather and have cotton candy and hot dogs when individuals were lynched in the Deep South, and it was largely white, largely male, and largely evangelical Christian. When you look at our American death penalty system today and the prosecutors that seek death sentences in cases, often if the victim is white, Michelle knows this data, they are largely white, they are largely male, and they are largely Christian. So that is why I made that correlation, because we haven't learned much from our past. And when we talk about equity in our criminal justice reform system, our criminal legal system, it's still not there. So if you don't learn from the past, you're bound to repeat the mistakes that were, or they probably weren't mistakes, of the past in the future.
You know, a quick question, because you talk about it from the standpoint that the death penalty and how it is, in more ways than one, the South is still trying to win the war, and so that the way you frame that, help me understand and help the audience understand better the point you were trying to make.
Sure. So the point of view that I wrote this article, I was being tongue-in-cheeky to white evangelicals.
Mm-hmm.
And when you talk about the Confederacy, right, who lost, at the end of that war, the daughters of the Confederacy sought to erect statues of these great, like, war heroes, Nathan Bedford Forrest and others, to paint them as heroes when they were actually losers who rebelled against their own country.
Edmund Pettus.
Yes,
Right.
we can keep naming them.
Right.
Like let's keep naming them, and many of them have come down in the last 5 years or so. Thankful for that, because they sought to rewrite history and to put them up as heroes. So with me, I'm presenting the article as, what does the South really want to win at? Because they didn't win the Civil War. And when you look at the maps of the states that held on to lynchings, or that they still lynch, and they'll say documented up until the 50s. I would say it's a bit longer, because there's a book, Michelle Alexander, The New Jim Crow,
Right.
that said there have been documentations of lynchings all the way up until the 90s. What is the South trying to prove as far as what are we winning at? And when I say South, I say the white South. I want to be very clear with that.
I'll tell you what
the
is
white South trying to win.
And what is interesting, even in your writings, and I know that Michelle, has dealt with this in her work here in Missouri, as you note, this whole idea about the death penalty as justice, and we all know that it's not a deterrent. I don't think there's any stats, any data that would prove that the death penalty has been a deterrent for any serious crime. And you note that in the 5 states with the highest homicide rate just last year, the 5 states with the highest homicide rates are southern death penalty states: Alabama, Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, and my home state, South Carolina. But I submit that St. Louis, Kansas City, and St. Louis and Kansas City as cities have the highest per capita murder rate in the country. St.
Right.
Louis, number one. Kansas City is either 2 or 3 or one of them. And Springfield, believe it or not, has been in the top 12. And so, Michelle, how do you counter this whole idea of law and order, and even one lawmaker in a recent article in the Kansas City Star said that the death penalty should always be an option. That the death penalty, that even though they might not want to talk about it, but in Missouri, you have Missouri legislators who say that the death penalty should always be an option. How do you counter that? You hear what Joia is saying, these 5 states, deterrent justice. What do you say as an advocate, as an organizer? How do you rally people around this?
Well, Pastor Gray, one thing I do is educating people. So when we have, these conversations and these meetings, breaking everything down from the crime stats that you mentioned, from the, I call it regurgitation of racial terror lynchings, from the historical aspect, from the legislative aspects. I have them conversations with people all the time. And the first thing I want to say about, being a deterrent, there is no statistical proof that the death penalty deters any other crime. Most people commit murder in heats of passion. So no one is stopping in the middle of their anger and say, oh, I might get the death penalty. It doesn't actually exist. But also in our state particularly, I want to talk about cost. Right? People say, oh, we don't have money for this. We got to cut the budget for that. We can't fund child care. We can't fund pre-K. We cannot fund all the things we need to fund in our city, in our state. But we got money to kill people. It costs about $1 million to kill someone. And so when we talk about these particular issues, it's like, do you not understand that this does not help? It doesn't deter. It is something that adds another layer of, the complicated court systems. When you have a death sentence, it's not like you get death sentence and you go sit in your cell until you are executed. There are decades of litigation that come, which cost as well. So people just don't understand what executions means. They also don't understand that we have a prison system. It's not great. It's there, right? I'm not a person that necessarily believes in prisons, but we have it. And so if you say someone has done some harm, incarceration is an option, and it is the best option because they're able to be redeemed. They might not get out of prison, but they can become a mentor to the persons incarcerated. They can become someone in that particular environment that is helping. And so to take that away and to kill someone, honestly, it's a bloodlust. And like Joia said, it's something from regurgitated from our past that just says we want vengeance. And I talked to someone yesterday who said there's only one person that's supposed to decide that, and it's definitely not the governor of Missouri.
I hear you.
So,
Right.
so Joia, Michelle, we're gonna get deep dive and have a little serious discussion right now, because at the end of the day, we're gonna have some people listening and say, "Hey, that person killed my loved one.
Mm-hmm.
That person killed my child. Just slaughtered them. And there's nowhere in the world this person is supposed to be running around here on this earth. And they took my loved one. They took my wife. They took my baby. They took my wife and my baby. And then they know what they're going to say. They're going to say, I just pulled some numbers up. They said in 2021, only 11 people in the whole country were executed. Only 11. People who got the death penalty sentence last year was only 18. So they sentenced 18 to death last year. They killed 11. And of course, at those numbers, they would say, well, there's really is not a big problem with executions going on in this country. We're not doing it. We only did 11 last year. We only put 18 on there. So you're going to hear that. So it'd be great. What is your response to the folks who saying, hey, I want justice, and I want the same justice that person gave to my loved one, to my baby, to my wife, to my whomever? And what are you going to say to them? Joia, let's start with you, and then we come back to Michelle.
Sure. I will refer them to have a conversation with a faith leader that I work with very closely in Ohio, Reverend Dr. Jack Sullivan, who is what we identify in our work a victim's family member. So his sister was brutally murdered in the early 90s. And he said to the prosecutor that he did not want to seek the death penalty because he believed that that would offer him no solace. And when you think about cases like Reverend Dr. Jack Sullivan, Sharon Risher, whose mother was killed in South Carolina as a part of the AME Church killings that Dylan Roof did, they offer no solace to the family once they are executed. That's what I would say. I would also say it is not up to the state to have that type of power over if someone lives or if someone dies, because oftentimes the state does get it wrong. There have been over 186 exonerations from death row, and this is federal and also states. So I would also point to that data, but I think the most important conversations we need to have is with those victim family members who are often drugged through appellate processes and different evidentiary hearings that may come after the sentences that can take up to 15, 20, 30 years before they feel, in quotations marks, justice is served for their family member. So I think it's so important to engage those victim family members who say, okay, that person was executed and it still doesn't give me any comfort because I cannot have my loved ones back. And as Michelle said, it doesn't deter crime. So why are we as a civilized nation, the only nation that's holding on to the most barbaric practice that we go to war with other countries for, like Iran and Iraq, for executing people who live in their country? We go to war with them, but we do the same thing in our country.
And before Michelle, I want just, I had a conversation with the chief of staff with Martin Luther King III, who was scheduled to be on the show today. And he did a tweet in support of Kevin Johnson and against the death penalty. And he said, today the state of Missouri is scheduled to execute Kevin Johnson. We know that the death penalty adversely affects Black and brown communities. In Kevin's case, it's jarring. We talk about the discriminatory factor of it, the prosecution, the whole criminal justice system. And so we talk about that, Pruitt. But as she said, we've talked to victims. The King family is our national victim. Dr. King was killed. Dr. King was murdered. Dr. King's mother was murdered while she was playing the organ in a church. And so you've got these people, Pruitt, who have raised up people of conscience, moral people, who have said that our humanness, our anger, we've got to rise above our anger. We've got to rise above our need for vengeance and our need for revenge. Go ahead, Michelle, because I'm a preacher. Y'all don't get me to preach. This ain't Sunday now, is it? No, it's not Sunday.
Not yet.
All right.
Well, to that answer, I will say this. To that question, I will say this first. We need to separate an individual from the state. I know a person, as I'm a mother, as a person, if something happened to my child or someone I loved in my family, yes, you have certain feelings. You are grieving and you want, some revenge. You want the person to pay for killing your loved one. I definitely understand that. The problem is when people look at the death penalty, they don't understand this is a policy. This is not anything personal. It's a policy that prosecutors in our state and in our country use for political purposes. They use it for media attention, right? So this is not something, they're not concerned about you, your family, your grief. They're trying to get to be a judge. They're trying to go on with their career. And so we need to separate the state from the individual. The state does not have the moral authority to kill anyone. And this is the example I give. The blood of my ancestors run through this ground, seeps in this ground, right? Who is this state to kill people? We have murdered in this country, genocided, murdered, killed, enslaved millions of brown and black people. But today the state of Missouri says that they have the moral authority to kill somebody. 2 and 2 is not making 4 for me. So I really want people to step back and see that their personal feelings are not the state. We have that same person who, would say, I wanted that revenge, they probably will have a problem with the state. They probably can't get their medicine. They can't get Medicaid approved. They can't get their kid into a great school. They have issues with the state. So they need to understand that this is also an apparatus of the state. It's not them personally. So that's the first step that I would really, because I talk to too many people who feel that, I want grief. I mean, in my grieving, I want revenge, but the state is not you. There was a case several months ago, a man, and when he was 19, he killed a great aunt. He was on drugs. He killed his great aunt trying to get money. And so they put the man on death row. Well, years later, his family had forgiven him. He had, gotten back in church, and they had the whole process of healing in their family. That family went to the governor of Texas and said, don't kill our loved one. We don't want another victim in our family. They still murdered that man. Why? Because the victim's family was the same family that was trying to beg for his life. So this is not something where the state cares about you. They literally do not care about you. They want a win in court, and they want a notch in their belt when they're trying to get a new position. So again, people need to understand you are not the state. The state has their own motives, and it's not to help you.
So
Right.
I just pulled up a Pew Report study, recent survey on death penalty. And it said that the use of the death penalty is gradually disappearing in the United States. Last year, in part because of the corona outbreak, but they said fewer people were executed than in any year in nearly 3 decades. So would you attribute, I know they talk about the corona, the COVID-19 and things like that, but would you attribute the fact that less people are being put to death from the advocacy work that you and people like Michelle are doing, or do you think it may be just some other factors that we're not hearing about?
I definitely believe it's both and. There's no denying that our world has went through some pretty turbulent times in the past 3 years dealing with the coronavirus. But I also would say that we stand on the shoulders of those that were able to abolish the death penalty federally in the 70s before it was reinstated in 1976. So there was this period that we did not have the death penalty in this entire country. And there were states, as you know, in the South, that rushed to reinstate the death penalty. Florida was one of the first. Georgia followed second. So the work of those advocates in the 70s, we stand on that, and we have that hope that we will abolish it, because it's so important that people just don't land under there have been no executions, right? Because we can also say there has been no plantations where there have been Black slaves. But just this year in Tennessee, there was a senator that brought up the issue of abolishing slavery in Tennessee in 2022 because it was still on the books.
Right.
And as Michelle said, when you talk about policy, there are a lot of antiquated laws that are discriminatory and racist laws that are still on the books in many states that people do not know about. And at any time, a senator that has vaulting ambition or a representative who has vaulting ambition can bring those things back. So it's not enough to say that we're not implementing it and we're not executing people. We have to abolish this practice that has no place in our American history as we are progressing forward.
And nobody's saying that people should not be punished. No one is saying that there should be no consequence for inappropriate behavior, no matter what it is. We talk about one sin versus another sin. Sin is sin, but we do understand. I mean, we had a senator, in our state, a Black senator, and I won't go into anything more than that, who said, well, think about it. What about the Jeffrey Dahmers? What about the Son of Sams? What about those vicious, murderous, barbaric, cannibalistic murderers that there is no hope for, that they're just simply evil? And I guess we're going to talk about that on the other side of the break. Y'all really stay tuned. This is a great conversation. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after this commercial break. We are Point Black.
Welcome back to Point Black. And Michelle was going to respond to Reverend Gray. You said Jeffrey Dahmer. You brought up.
I'm just saying. That's what I mean. Pruitt, you're right. That's what they're saying.
Dahmer.
Yeah, Jeffrey Dahmer, son, all of them. And,
Son of Sam.
And and Michelle said it. And again, somebody asked me, Reverend Gray, you come in your house. Somebody is ravishing your child, your daughter, your son, your wife. What you gonna do? And I said, wait a minute, I'm human.
You're gonna shoot him in the leg,
I'm
right?
saying that I'm prayerful that my faith will sustain me, and that the police will get there before I finish.
No, you shoot him in the leg.
And that's what I said.
Shoot
I
him
was
in the
very
leg.
honest.
Shoot him in the leg.
That's what it is. I'm not the Lone Ranger, man. My aim ain't that good. But I get it, though. BJ, I get it. That if I walk in, and if I've got to defend my home, that's different. If I got to defend my home.
But
we're saying capital punishment for the worst of those. I'm still saying I don't agree with capital punishment, but
we're going to let Michelle, we're going to let you respond. Because Michelle, what the senator brought up was the fact that, now imagine, and I can't think of the guy that was out of California. He actually died in prison before they had a chance he got off of death row. Black guy that was, I think it was the Highway 70 killer. They attributed at least 60, he was women, prostitutes and other women he was collecting, killing them. And he remembered it so vividly, he started drawing pictures of them, and he closed hundreds of cases, murder cases across this country. Mm-hmm. And I can't remember his name, something in St. Louis. And so when you talk about somebody who just went out hunting for people and killing them, like you do for deer or rabbits or whatever else, and you catch them, respond to the person that says, wait a minute, why is this guy going to stay alive?
Exactly. Well, I will say, of course, we know that prisons exist. Prisons are there, and once, that is discovered, that's where the person needs to be. But I'll say this about the entire issue. There is a quote, when society catches the cold, black people catch the flu. So when we're talking about, the worst of these and most of these serial killers and these people, if we're going to treat them so barbaric, that's going to trickle down to us, to people like Kevin and to people like other folks who, most of the people on death rows and incarcerated are not serial killers. That is a very small percentage of people. But when we're talking about that worst outcome for those people that we deem the worst of the worst, it is going to trickle down to everyone else that possibly did something like Kevin out of grief or somebody who did something from a drug addiction. So we need to understand that when we're talking about giving people the worst sentences, et we gonna catch hell with that. We gonna get the worst of that entire, outcome. So even we talked Son of Sam and Jeffrey Dahmer. I want to talk about Derek Chauvin. When he killed George Floyd and went on trial, people messaged me, you're against the death penalty. What about him? There is a prison and he's in it, okay? And we can keep on stepping from there. I don't have to feel in my heart this deep vengeance for him to die, right? I can understand that he is in a secured facility, and whatever his daily existence is, that's what it is. And so we don't have to have, that a barbarity for everyone, because again, it's going to trickle down to my people. Also, I'll say this, when you talked about that, people bring to me Ted Bundy. Every time I talk to somebody about death penalty, for some reason, like this man is on everybody's mind. And I say, guess what? And I learned this last year. They offered Ted Bundy a life sentence. He was such a narcissist, he wouldn't accept it. And that's why he got the death penalty. But the prosecutor offered Ted Bundy a plea to life, and he could have been doing life in prison.
Now, you make a good point. So, and you enjoy, I want you to respond. You make a good point. What if I'm in prison and you give me life without parole, and I'm saying, no, kill me. I don't want to live a life in prison like this.
You're forfeiting your own life.
Is that? Would you say that are those executions proper? The person saying, I don't want to live in a cage like an animal for the rest of my life. I got a lot of life left. Just go ahead and I'm ready to go home. Take me out.
Again, I think the question keeps coming up about the state. We keep talking about the power of the state to exercise their right to take someone's life. That is totally different from an individual's choice. So if an individual chooses that is their choice. There's also this law, I believe it's like in Colorado or Montana, when someone has a terminal illness. There is some type of law if they want to, I think it's called assisted suicide or assisted termination of life. You guys know what I'm talking about. So if that person decides on their own that they want to end their own life, that no longer lies on the state. That is the individual. We're talking about the state, juries full of racial bias, prosecutors, D.A. McCullough, full of racial bias, and others having that right to exercise that for the state of Missouri, for the state of Tennessee, for the state of Florida. We're saying no, because what happens is they'll kill a Dylan Roof to kill 10 Black people that could possibly be innocent. So
and
we have to really look at that.
As we look at Black versus white, what is 56% of America believes in the death penalty, that there should be a death penalty.
60% now, latest vote.
Yeah. And so if you're talking about 60%, and I think that people are scared. I mean, people see what's going on in the country, and so people are scared, and people think that that's going to make the difference. The problem is it doesn't. That's the problem. And that's why we need people like you, Joia, and people like Michelle, who are going to go out here every day and educate and inform, and shows like this. In the Southern Baptist Convention, and the Southern Baptists have really been big about pushing capital punishment because they believe that the scripture allows it. Well, that's some of that Old Testament eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. And I submit to you that an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth will leave us all blind and toothless. And they're saying capital punishment, and this is their own quote out of their own convention. Capital punishment should never be a simple thing. It should never be a vindictive activity. Now, this is the leadership of the Southern Baptist Church. If there is any possibility of doubt, the death penalty should be avoided. But we continue to raise doubt. We continue to raise doubt within the criminal justice system. There are too many wrongfully convicted Black and brown and poor people in jail.
But there's no doubt if a person says I did it and pleads guilty, there's no doubt.
But even with that,
go ahead. I'm just saying.
Even with that, we still don't have the right. We don't give life. As you know, and we have to put that. If religious groups and politicians want to use scripture and the Bible and Christianity or whatever to validate.
Now y'all gonna get the good part of the show. This is when me and Daryl have some fun. So Daryl, so when the police shoot a guy that's out there running or shooting at people, the police shoot and kill. Police have the power to take life. That's an execution in some ways. That's the state. I'm just saying that's the state.
And remember what I said. If the police is defending him or herself, if it's an act of defense, it's an act of defense. But if it's an arm, if somebody's running away, that's not an act. Who are you defending if somebody's running away? Now, if somebody has hurt somebody and they're running away and the police say, halt, 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 I would suggest that anybody that's running, the police say, stop, stop. But I think we're talking about apples. We're talking about apples and oranges here. We're talking about, as Michelle said, politicians who use capital punishment for political reasons. It has nothing to do with justice. It has nothing to do with bringing families to closure. And I think, and you're still talking about a system, president of the NAACP, and you fought against this for all your life. You're still talking about a system that is fraught with inequity and discrimination and malpractice and hatred and all of the above.
And I'm opposed to the death penalty, but the folks who are in support of it are not in this room.
Right.
So
yes.
we're gonna try our best to represent them as best we can.
You're gonna be the devil's advocate today, Adolph. You're being the devil's advocate.
We're gonna represent them, and I don't mind.
You do wear red. You do wear red.
I don't mind. But Joy, let me ask you this. So we killed Bin Laden. The state said, hey, find him and kill him. We all saw the terrorists. We said find him and kill him. And that's the state doing it. Is that execution?
America is just one of the most hypocritical nations in the entire world. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying. We killed him for doing the very same things that we do to our own citizens. When you talk about states like South Carolina that are talking about bringing back the firing squad because there have been issues with the cocktail of lethal injection drugs, it's just full of hypocrisy.
Yeah.
So we are fed the rhetoric from this American exceptionalism theory that we're the best. We're justified in doing what we did. We were not.
But
I had issues with that.
But Joia, they're going to say that, hey, he killed 1,600 people or more in the World Trade Center. He's plotting and sending people to blow up the Cole? There was a ship that it killed sailors there, and they blowing up things. And let's not talk.
But we put people in Guantanamo Bay.
Let's talk about the folks.
In prison.
Yeah, but let's not talk about the guy out of what was his name? McVie. McVie out of Oklahoma and blew up the building and killed all those people, and he got the death. I guess what I'm trying to say is you're saying that nothing rises to a level where the state, the government, the country has the right to seek out the termination of that life. You said nothing rises to that level.
No, I don't believe it. I don't believe that it does. I
There you
believe
go.
that this country,
Stand your ground.
This country, okay, the United States of America,
Right.
And let me say, as Christians believe that every individual human might be someone chosen by God for his salvation and for his service. When we take another human life unnecessarily, we usurp God's prerogative for that person's eventual salvation. If they are already saved, for that person's future service for the kingdom of God. That's what I believe. That's what I believe.
Excuse me, George.
I believe that for all people.
Go ahead.
George, excuse me 1 minute, but he was called to believe that. He was called. See, everybody else isn't.
Show with that whole thing,
everybody
too.
else isn't called to receive that. He was recalled to receive that.
We were also taught that we live in one of the greatest countries and one of the greatest nations in our world when we're not. We killed people in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. We've killed thousands of people during the transatlantic slavery.
Yes.
We've killed Native Americans and wiped them out of their own lands.
We're going to have to
cannot
wrap
make
up.
that decision.
Listen, it's been a great conversation. Again, we're dedicating this show to the memory of Kevin Johnson. Listen, it's been great. Thank you, Joia. Thank you, Michelle.
Reverend, before you close out, folks, he's right. And one thing we want to do, BJ, and everybody listening, let's just take a moment of silence, not just for Kevin Johnson, but for all the loss of all life, whether it was out of the hands of the state, whether it was an accident, whether it's anything. Let's just take a moment and pause, because if you hear me, you are here today, and we are here today. And the sanctity of life is important. So just a moment of silence, and then the Reverend will take us out.
Okay, we're going to count off.
Thank you, Reverend.
I counted those 8. I counted to 8, the 8 minutes that I spent with Kevin. Thank you very much. You've been listening to Point Black. Tuning again next week.